Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, where today we're starting a brand new series here on the channel as we continue in the world of anime Marvel, Phase 3, Part 1 of the Fallout Saga. We're coming with a brand new series that was suggested to me by one of our fellow PowerCore members. Unfortunately, I can't find the original post where the suggestion came from. Chances are the person who suggested it will probably comment in this video in the comment section. So to the person who suggested for me to make this series, I want to say thank you. Want to try to give you the proper credit. If you do see this series, please shout yourself out in the comment section down below so I can give you the proper credit, because it's thanks to you that we have this series here on the channel. Originally, I wasn't going to do something with Hawkeye, but after the suggestion, watching Frieren, reading some Hawkeye comics and stories, I think I've been able to craft something that will play as a tribute to the story of Hawkeye in general and crossing over into the world of Frieren as well. This is something that I am very excited to work with, something I've been looking forward to doing for a while now, and I can't wait to put this out for all of you to see, to enjoy the tale of two Hawkeyes in Frieren, the elf and the archer. What if Frieren trained Hawkeye? We begin with Season 1, Part 1. As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Time. The one thing that you can never get back. It's the one thing that money, unfortunately, cannot buy. And even if it does, it never lasts long. Time is the one commodity that is ultimately worth more than any gold or silver, than any precious stone, than any grimoire. Contrary to popular belief, magic, for all of its advantages, it did not have one over time, or at least not a mastery. You could master the elements of fire, water, earth, lightning, wind, the power of both light and darkness. You could master the abilities of gravity, the power of nature. Domain over any and everything could be at your disposal, and yet time was the one thing that eluded your grasp. For Frieren, she always knew this, being of the elven race. Even with her party of adventurers, she always knew. No matter what memories she made, no matter how many occasions they celebrated, in the end, she would outlive them all. What was a lifetime for many was nothing but a fleeting moment for her. Even to other elves, this form of apathy had grown through their community. It was the reason why the elf race had dwindled so much, to the point of almost being non-existent. What was the point of having children, especially between two elves? For one, it would take the child forever to grow. And even as the child grew, it would outlive its parents by a considerable margin, and that was considering the fact that the parents lived a long life. For the elves, time was not a factor. If anything, it was the most of non-factors in the world. You could live multiple lifetimes all in one. Heck, for most elves, by the time they reached what you could even call their 40s and potentially have a midlife crisis, they'd already seen regimes come and go. For Frieren, it was no different. The kingdom that she was serving now, it didn't always exist. No, there was a kingdom before that and the kingdom before that. Nations, civilizations, they all came and went, rose and fall, like the tides that crash against the shores of the seas. That was just how life worked. How she found herself being contracted with other adventurers to go and defeat a demon king? Heck, she didn't really remember herself. She honestly forgot. Was she just a drifter? Did she just happen to get pulled and roped in with some other shenanigans? She wasn't entirely sure. But what mattered was that they succeeded. They defeated the Demon King. They came back to the capital as heroes. Praised, celebrated, everything you could expect. During her stay, she remembered watching the meteor shower. It was a phenomenon that only occurred once every 50 years. She promised her companions that she would return someday, that she would return and watch the meteor shower with them once again, although she knew that by the time she returned, her companions would already have one foot in the grave, so for them it would be more of a last hurrah than anything else. But for Frieren, it didn't particularly bother her. She could keep that promise easily because for her, no time would have really passed. In terms of her aging, all she could do was travel and continue to learn, collect grimoires, perfect spells and other abilities she had along the way. What started out as being just a journey of 5 years turned to 10. 10 turned to 15, 15 turned to 20, 20 turned to 30, 30 turned to 40. But it was around that 45-year mark. Frieren had traveled a considerable distance, but she knew the meteor shower wasn't for another 5 years, so there was no real urgency to have to return and see anyone. She remembered walking through the forest, far off from any village or any other nation, and she heard crying. At first, she tried to ignore it, believing that perhaps it was just some animal, but her ears were too keen. It sounded like a baby. No, 2 babies. As she walked over and approached, she saw swaddled in ragged cloth 2 infants. Frieren was easily able to tell that they weren't related, at least not by blood. But what situation could have... Oh. She saw the tatters and the remains. A monster attack, a traveling convoy. It was the usual suspect in situations like this. People traveled in groups for a reason. You never knew what you'd run into out in the wild. Monsters, ravenous animals, beasts, demons, ghouls, goblins, all manner of maleficent being. How the children were spared, she had no idea. She quickly took them up and tried to find them a secure lodging. All she could do was make a tent for the night. With her magic, she could easily provide them nourishment and sustenance, rocking them to sleep and trying to get some herself. When the next day came along, she immediately knew that she had to get these babies somewhere. If she could find a village with a church or a monastery or something, then perhaps men of the cloth would be willing to raise them, or maybe some other orphanage, or perhaps even some barren parents looking for children to have of their own. At least that was the idea. Traveling by foot, it would take time. Time that ebbed and flowed. At first, she tried not to form much of an attachment to them. It wasn't like she hated them or anything. They were just random children. One blonde, one with dark brown hair. The children would cry and wail, sometimes keeping Frieren up a lot longer than she wanted to be. Sometimes she felt like she was at her wit's end, but then there were other moments. Watching the babies walk for the first time, them learning how to speak, developing. For her, it felt like time simply slowed. What was that village she was supposed to find? She could find it tomorrow, yeah. After all, they were tired. They needed to rest. Slowly but surely, day by day, she put off trying to find another home for the children. Of course, this slowed her journey down somewhat. She couldn't go adventuring the way she wanted to, but in the end, it wasn't like it was an inconvenience. She had all the time in the world. What would be the crucial years for these children to develop, for her, it'd be nothing more but the snap of a finger. Before she knew it, they'd probably be more than capable of going off on their own. By the time she returned back to the kingdom to meet with her friends once again, and one in particular, as she needed to find that shadow horn that she had been keeping stored away, Himmel, Heater, and Eisen. Himmel, the warrior of her party, had grown very much in the years that had gone by. Barren was his head, as all the hair was gone, left nothing more but a silvered beard, shortened in height and stature and in power and strength. Of course, Himmel never doubted for a moment that Frieren would return, but what he didn't expect were 2 5-year-old boys, one blonde and one brown-haired. I see you've been busy. Oh, you've been gone, Frieren. So, who's the lucky papa? No one. I found these children in the forest. Ah, forest babies. It was a convoy attack more than anything. Monsters? Most unlikely. Well, I never thought that you'd be a mother. I'm not a mother, Himmel. I'm just looking out for them, that's all. The 2 young boys would introduce themselves. My name's Jack. I'm Clint. Nice to meet you, sir. Well-spoken and well-mannered. It's nice to meet you, young fellows. You both have a great privilege to travel alongside the likes of Frieren. Not many get that opportunity in life. So, has she taught you anything? I'm good with a sword. I can use a bow. We're iffy when it comes to magic. No need to feel bad. In my day, I took up using the sword myself. It's how we were able to defeat the Demon King. I remember that story a lot more different, Himmel. Oh well, the details come and go. Say, have you boys ever seen a meteor shower? Will they be accompanying us? But of course. With that, the gang would get back together once again. The others still being just as surprised to see that Frieren was carrying children around with her. But all the same, they were welcomed. Together, the group would make their way to a special place, a special watching area just for them, where they would watch the meteor shower together. Himmel watched as the 2 boys sat at the bottom of the hill, jumping up and down in the air, excitement filling them as they watched the sky light up with the various meteors that streaked across the sky. For Himmel, he saw that youthful vigor. It made him yearn back for his younger days, remembering what his life used to be like. He looked over to Frieren, who was also enjoying the meteor shower. For her, this was very different than anything else. For her, this was nothing more but a typical Tuesday than anything else. Significant, yes, but still typical. For these boys, the next time the shower came, they would have lived very, very different lives by then. They were only 5 now. Chances are the next time they saw the meteor shower could easily be their last. But when you're human, you often take those things into consideration, always knowing that some of the most beautiful moments in life can also be the most fleeting. But he had no regrets in one regard. He had lived a very fulfilling and wonderful life with many amazing and beautiful people. He couldn't have asked for anything more. For both Clinton and Jack, they had seen many sides to Frieren in the time that she was raising them. They saw her stern side, her caring side, her worried side, her protective side. Never once had they seen the woman that had raised them shed a tear. No, that was the one thing she didn't do. So when the day came when they buried Himmel, to watch the woman that they looked up to and aspired, to watch her break down into tears, it hurt them. She'd done so much for them, so much more than what could have been asked, and they saw that person that they loved in pain. They didn't know much about Himmel, but anyone that was important to her was important to them. They too shed tears as they embraced her in a hug, and she felt more than compelled to hug them back. From there, they would leave, saying their goodbyes. Of course, she promised to visit both Eisen and Heater again, although the two older companions, the dwarf and the priest, knew that likely they would have passed before she came, but if they were still holding on, they welcomed the visit. From there, 15 more years would pass, the boys continuing to grow and to get stronger. They traveled alongside Frieren as she taught them what she could. Of course, while she was an elf and a mage, that wasn't her only skills, no. She was skilled in the way of the sword and in the way of the bow. She just didn't like to use those methods. Personally, she found them to be more barbaric than anything else. But the two boys that she had taken in, they had but only a small affinity for magic. So rather than using it to try to cast spells and other different abilities, they preferred to use magic to heighten their senses. You see, magic worked in many ways, but when you broke it down, there were two primary functions. There was casting and enhancing. Using casting magic, depending on your aptitude, you could make things like fire, water, and other sorts of elements and creations from your mana. The second application was for enhancement. That was using your mana to increase your physical and your speed, increasing your eyesight, your hearing, your taste, your smell, enhancing your senses and making you almost superhuman. Of course, this all depended on the amount of mana that you had. A lot of people only have a small bit of mana, minuscule, to the point where using it would be next to worthless. But if you had a decent amount, you could use your mana to increase your physical strength. You could maybe go from carrying 50 pounds to 100 pounds, maybe even 200 or 300 pounds if necessary. You could use it to run faster for longer periods of time, increase your stamina and things of that nature. That was the area where the boys persisted in. Clint, he took up using the skills of the archer, the skill of the bow. That was where he was most prominent. Although he was also proficient in the sword, but he wasn't anything compared to Jack. No, when it came to the two boys using swords, Jack was more proficient than anything else. There wasn't any sword technique that he couldn't pick up from Frieren. In fact, outside of her, there was hardly anyone that he couldn't beat. It didn't matter what swordsman he faced. It didn't matter how much proficient they were or how many years they had. No, Frieren trained Jack very well. So much so that outside of Frieren, the only person who really gave him any competition was Clint. When the boys turned 21, they would have their final meal with Frieren. It was time for the boys to go out on their own. She'd watched them grow, and while she could have left them at 18, she wanted to make sure that their skills were refined. That night, They celebrated and enjoyed themselves greatly. Of course, when the next day came, you could almost say that everyone had feet like lead. Come on now, boys. You know that... Yeah, we know. It's not like it's goodbye. You know we'll still see each other again. Yeah, Clint said. It's just... We've just been together for so long and... I don't know. I kind of didn't want this journey to end. I've taught you boys many things. And I know that as long as you look out for one another, as long as you protect one another, keep each other safe, I know that you'll both be okay. I've taught you well, haven't I? The two boys nodded. After enjoying their breakfast and preparing their goodbyes, they packed their bags, their weapons in hand, and setting off. They were going to go to a town and start their own adventures. They promised that, when the time was right, they'd meet with Frieren once again, a location and date already set. Frieren watched as the two boys left the cabin, making their way down the road. It was no more than 3 minutes when she opened the door and saw that the two boys hadn't even made it halfway from the house. She stood behind them. What's the matter? Nothing, Jack said. It's just... the damn rain. It's hard to see. Yeah, Clint said. It's really raining hard. Yeah, Frieren said. I think it's raining really hard. The boys turned back quickly and fell into her arms once more. Despite having grown to be much taller than her and much bigger, in her arms once again they were nothing more but the little infants that used to come running to her whenever they were scared in the night, scared from a thunderstorm or for something they thought they saw in the dark. All those memories flashing through Frieren's mind once again so clearly and vividly. She couldn't deny it. They were her boys. But she knew that as long as they took care of each other, as long as they looked out for one another, she knew, she just had to know, they'd be all right. The boys finally set off, and Frieren, she continued on in her journeys. About 15 years later, she found herself meeting with Hawkeye once again, the priest now looking much, much older than the last time she'd seen him. Living by himself secluded, the rather unholy priest, as he was often known, a man of the cloth who often gave to revelry. But so much time had changed, the man had even gone off the bottle. Although, as Frieren would put it, trying to live a rather priestly life at the end of one's life didn't earn you reward points when you tried to pass through the pearly gates. Although, for Hawkeye, he liked to believe that for all the good they did in their lifetime, they already had their seats in heaven booked. It was just a matter of cashing in on the reservation. In the care of Hawkeye was a small girl by the name of Fern, a girl who had the potential to be a great mage in her own right. Hawkeye would give Frieren a grimoire. He didn't have much use for it, but he figured if anyone could make use of deciphering it, she could. Perhaps it had something about extending one's life or immortality. Frieren would agree to look through it, but unfortunately she couldn't find anything of the sort. Of course, this was unlike her companion. He wasn't the type of person to ever really worry about one's fate or destiny. But even Hieter would admit, when you're young and dumb, you don't really care about tomorrow. You don't really care about what's going to happen, no. You live every day like it's your last. And for some people, they're much like a firework. Something that flashes bright but only lasts for a short time. Some people, you could say, are blessed to be like a candle. A candle with a large amount of wax. They're able to slowly burn out. You never really think about what you'll do when you get towards the end of the wick. When all the wax is almost gone and there's nothing more to use. The flame is close to dying out, and well, it's only during that time that you realize you wish you had more of it. But for Frieren, you could say that that sort of topic was a running theme of her life. It wasn't that he either had any worries about dying, no. It was just that one couldn't help but naturally wonder if just for a brief time, could I get some more of it? Even if it's just a few more minutes. Eventually, Hieter would pass, leaving Fern in Frieren's care. From then on, she would look after the little girl. Hieter had more than enough reason to trust her. After all, she had looked after her two boys well enough. For Frieren, she felt like she were in that role once again. The two would travel together, searching for grimoires and other things of that nature. Eventually, along the way, they would meet up with Eisen once more, the dwarf. He was still kicking around, but for how much longer, he had no idea. While in conversation with him, Frieren was reminded of her master from 1,000 years ago. Her master, a human woman named Flam. She had possessed a grimoire that spoke of a place known as Auriel. It was located near where the Demon King had been defeated. It was said that this was an area where one could communicate with the dead once again. Eisen suggested that maybe that would be a place where she could meet with Himmel once again. Because for Frieren, he had never left her mind. The person she had traveled with, the person she'd spent almost 10 years with. And yet when he died, she felt like she knew nothing about him. For all that time spent, for all the adventures they had gone on. And yet when it came to it, she really didn't know much about him at all. Perhaps this was her opportunity, her chance to see him one more time. However, before leaving though, Eisen would tell them of a young man that he had trained by the name of Stark. He was skilled with the battle axe just like he was, and he believed that if both Frieren and Fern were going to be making such an arduous journey, they could use his support. Taking it into consideration, Frieren and Fern would travel to the village that the boy was living in, and after encounter with a couple of ghostly ghouls in a haunted forest, as well as helping to deal with a town dragon, they'd come to realize that the boy truly had great strength that would be needed on their journey, and even more so, that despite the boy's lack of confidence in himself, he had great potential. And Stark was also looking to have a journey of his own adventures that he could hopefully tell his master someday. Of course, before setting off to the famed land of Auriel, there was one stop that Frieren wanted to make. In all of her times of travel, she had been keeping loose tabs on her boys. The last she had heard, one of them, Clint, was located in a village far to the east. It was more secluded than anything else, but she believed that if she could get in contact with him, perhaps he'd be willing to accompany her. Perhaps he could tell where Jack was as well, and they could make this a whole group thing. She hadn't seen them in so long. You can imagine that it filled her with excitement. The idea of traveling with her boys after all this time. The adventures that they could go on again. She remembered when the young boys accompanied her into an abandoned temple, or the time where they nearly got captured by a giant monstrous bird that took the two boys and planted them in the nest, and she had to fish them out. Or there were the times when the boys had to pull the young, well, I use the term young very loosely with Frieren, from outside of a mimic that, well, wasn't actually a treasure chest, but no, it was just a monster in disguise. But as the young boys knew, nothing stood between Frieren and a grimoire. As they arrived to the said village, Frieren continued to ask more and more of those who passed by if they knew anyone by the name of Clint. The name was very vague, but the last time they'd heard anything about him, he was living off at the higher end of the mountainside in a secluded cabin. He had become a hunter, using his archery skills to use. He would often hunt monsters or wild animals and sell them off to the butcher along those natures. With that, Frieren, Fern, and Stark would make their way up the mountainside. Eventually, walking into the forest itself, they searched for this said cabin. Although, what they didn't expect was arrows to come flying at them from every which way. Stark was nearly hit in the shoulder, if not for Fern creating a barrier with her magic. Both Frieren and Stark would stand behind her as the arrows came flying from every which way and direction. "What the heck's going on, Miss Frieren?" Stark would ask as he grabbed his battle axe. If I knew where the guy was, or girl, not to be prejudiced, whoever was shooting those damn arrows, perhaps I could lop them off. It's not going to be that simple. These arrows are enhanced with magic. Powerful magic, too. This isn't any ordinary arrow pattern, Frieren thought. I know this style. Clint? Clint, is that you? Clint, it's me, Frieren. I don't know any damn Frieren, a voice would say. I don't know who the hell you are, but I suggest you get the hell away from here. This is my father's land. I won't give you a second warning. Next shot, I'm taking you out. They knew very well than to try to piss off their assailant. However, Frieren was quickly able to deduce where the archer was lying. Casting earthen magic, she would use a spell to try to distort the ground, throwing off the trajectory of the archer's shot, long enough for Fern to create an opening and to draw him out. By the time they did, Stark would go in for the slash. However, the hooded boy would be able to avoid them at the last second. However, as he reached for another arrow, Frieren would make sure to shoot out a projectile of magic, shooting off the boy's pouch on his back, causing him to lose his arrows. And before he could even have a chance to try to regroup, Frieren had already cut him off, holding her magic staff to his neck. There are about 1,000 ways that I could take you out right now. Do you care to pick? I recognized your fighting style with that bow and arrow. It's a style that I taught someone. So you must be familiar with Clint. Clint, the hooded boy would say. He removed his hood, and for Frieren, she almost felt like she were looking back at someone that she used to know. It looked just like Clint, but younger. But he should have been much older. Clint, is that you? No, I'm not Clint. That's my father's name. Your father? Stark said. Yeah, my father's name. Well, that was his real name. His hero name, or adventure name, if you want to go by that, he was called the Hawkeye. I've heard about him, Frieren would say. He's a famed archer. Said that he's gone on a lot of impressive missions and adventures. You hear about it from time to time in some taverns, depending on where you go. Do you know where he is? Frieren would ask. I'm looking for him. Wait a second. Small elf girl, dressed in white, a staff. Are you Frieren? The one my father talked about. I would have to be, I hope. But where is Clint? Frieren could tell by the look on the boy's face, a somber expression washing over it. Where is Clint? Frieren would ask. You don't know? Know what? Please, you have to tell me. Is he all right? Is he in danger? Where is he? Follow me. The boy would lead them down a path, past the cabin where he and his father used to live in. Just a few paces beyond, in a clearing of the forest, there was a mound of dirt and a tombstone with a broken bow placed in front of it. For Stark and for Fern, they'd heard a lot of stories from Frieren about the boys that she had raised. Clinton and Jack, two prodigy fighters in their own right. They had always expected that whoever this Clint was, that he'd be living it up. They didn't expect him to already be in his final resting place. No. That can't be. I'm sorry. Young man, Frieren would ask, what is your name? How do you... My name's Francis. Clinton was my father. He was killed. What? It was 7 years ago. My father, he left. He left with some other guy. Another guy? Who? What happened? What happened to my... Frieren, Fern would say, you need to... No! Who did this? Who killed my boy? In that moment, Frieren felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. They say that there are many types of anger and rage. But on this day, hell hath no fury like a mother's scorn. This concludes Frieren, the Elf and the Archer. What if Frieren trained Hawkeye? Season 1, Part 1. I do hope you guys enjoyed the first part of this series. I do want to try to answer some of the questions that you may have ahead of time before we go any further. So this part covers episodes 1 through 6 of the anime, And if you're wondering why I skipped over a lot of moments in those parts, it's mainly because it doesn't pertain to the story, so it already happened. That means that Frieren and Fern's fight against one of the Demon King's generals, Zoltar, their meeting with Stark fighting the dragon, things of that nature. All of those parts already happened in the story, so they were just summarized ahead of time so we could get to the part of the story where we introduce Hawkeye, aka son of Hawkeye, Francis. So that's kind of how the story is going to play out going forward. It will be a mix between anime moments and original moments as well. And they're just kind of playing with each other, going hand in hand. But if I don't cover a particular part, that means you can just assume that it just happened off screen. And because you've already watched the anime, there's no point in me, retelling it. So it'll just be summarized. But anyway, I do hope you enjoy. Please stay tuned tomorrow as we will continue with What If Frieren Trained Hawkeye, Frieren, the Elf and the Archer, Season 1, Part 2. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.